Yes,
So we're tabling the first item?
yes.
So we're just gonna go with authorization to set the public
Okay, we
hearing.
should be all set.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 6:30 work session of Tuesday, July 26th. Can I have a motion to open the work session?
So moved.
All in favor?
Second.
Or second?
Second.
Oh my God,
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, before we start, again, I just want to reiterate, work sessions are a time when we discuss, things are not final, we don't take votes. But it's a time when we discuss issues that may come before us. So Jill, you wanna?
Right, so the first thing on our agenda that we're gonna be considering this evening is authorization to set a public hearing on a local law to add chapter 93 of the Town of Newcastle Town Code concerning property maintenance. So we had actually started this conversation last work session, and there were some suggestions from the board for edits, trying to simplify and streamline the proposal. Ed has taken those along with comments from Tom DePaul, our building inspector, and what you have before you is a revised a second revision of the proposed local law. So I don't know if the board has any questions or comments on it, if these edits are what the board had in mind.
So I think the edits are really good. You know, I had a few changes we discussed. Do you wanna go through those?
Sure,
And sort of walk everybody through what the changes are?
well, we took out on the first and second pages, we started to take out those specific examples that are already in the New York State Property Maintenance Code in one form or another, but I think the consensus at the last meeting was that there was no need to reiterate all of those in the local code. There was an effort in C and D, and I'm in 93-2, to refocus the provision on the area immediately surrounding a home. And speaking with Tom, there's a concern that in some cases you have situations where there's like a tree down that on a property that's not being maintained. And there's a need to clear that tree so that if first responders ever had to gain access to the property and the house, they could, and the same thing with vegetation. There's a life safety need to make sure that the area immediately around a home isn't overly grown or obstructed in any way with vegetation. And that really is the premise or was the reason for coming forward with this local law in the first place and giving Tom, as the building inspector, some additional enforcement remedies. It's for the occasional zombie property that we see in the town to give him some better tools to deal with those situations. And also just the occasional example where you've got a house that's just not being maintained as it should be. So that was the effort in C and D. Now in D, I just want to point out one other change. So C and D, where it makes reference to vegetation in excess of 10 inches. Again, that's from the state code requirement, 10 inches. There's a definition for weeds. So we have to work within that framework. But within that framework, Tom and I work on some clarifying language to try to get to examples where folks have pollinator gardens, where it isn't a question of them, the resident just giving up and abandoning maintenance. It's an effort to actually achieve something. So that's language, and the board may want to discuss this, and maybe there's some refinement or improvements that can be made, and I know this is something that the Conservation Board has an interest in as well. But that's an effort to try to get there with language that works within the state code requirements.
I thought that was a good add there.
I think it's a great ad. I mean, I think I'd love to, I know the Conservation Board is keenly focused on this and would obviously love to hear, since there are several people on there that are really truly expert in, you know, how to think about these issues, but I like that as well. I mean, I thought, you know, one other concept there, just because I think the only word the only word that kind of qualifies what this is cultivated. It's either uncultivated or cultivated. You know, and I don't know whether, you know, that's the only word we can use. I mean, I was thinking intentional might be another way to think about it. Like if someone has made an intentional decision to create a meadow or a pollinator garden, like that should not, in my opinion, should not be covered. Because when I think of cultivated, I don't know, I just think of something that's a little more
Manicured.
exactly, yeah. So that just becomes a little more analogous in my mind, and I wouldn't want people to think that's what we're driving at, because that's clearly not what we're driving at.
Right.
So
Tom,
I like intentional.
Tom, I just wanna make sure that you know that your comments are welcome, that while we're having this open discussion, it would be great if you could just contribute. You're always such a gentleman and you keep yourself on mute, but I think the board would very much like to hear whatever input or comments you have on the discussion that's going on. I still don't hear you, even though you're not.
Tom, your audio's not working. I also got a text, by the way, from people saying the audio was not working at the beginning of the meeting as well.
Tom, say something.
Mhm.
I'm giving up on you.
Not hearing you.
Can't hear you.
While Tom's working on the question, when you mean intentional, are you using the word intentional to in lieu of cultivated and unintentional for uncultivated? Was my question is if you I'm just confused because if you intentionally wanna have something that may be improper, for lack of a better term, you're intentionally doing it, if that's your intent to wanna have that, so that becomes an issue.
Well,
So I intentionally wanna do bad things or have ugly things.
No, I
or-
think it's meant to be if you're intentionally planting a pollinator garden,
Right,
we're allowing pollinator gardens, for instance, or
No,
if you
he's
want a
fine.
meadow. But if, we're not saying if you intentionally wanna leave, you know, broken debris all over your lawn, that's okay, no, it's still a violation
So-
of the real property,
so we're still.
of the property maintenance code.
Right, so then, just for clarity, so we're still going to have the same concept and the same 10 inches because that's what the state says.
Correct.
But our code is going to say intentionally, but doesn't that become just a little bit more of a burden?
Yeah.
Difficult burden, it becomes more of a headache to prove.
Well, I mean,
That's what I
look,
was
at some point, right, the state law says what it says, so at some point, Tom either has to prove it or not prove it. So there's always gonna be that issue.
True.
And so I think what we're trying to say to residents is fear not if you're someone who wants to have a meadow or a pollinator garden, the building inspector's not gonna come around and start whacking it.
Right.
And that's, you're right, it's always gonna be a judgment call, and look, I'm guessing that if Tom, who I can't imagine will, and we'll certainly hear from him in a minute,
Hopefully hear from him.
yeah, exactly, the audio starts to work, but if
Any better, excuse me?
Yes,
yeah,
Okay, great.
if the
I'm sorry
town,
about that.
if the town started to kind of like, you know, go crazy with this, we'll hear about it, and then we'll have to revisit the language, but that's all, the only point I'm trying to.
Yeah, and look, to me, the intent of this law is not for Tom to go in and say, I don't think you did a good job mowing your lawn, we're gonna mow your lawn, no. The intent is if there's really a property, either a zombie property or one that is so unkempt that it's causing a significant issue, we're still not going in and doing that unless there's an imminent danger. Tom is gonna issue a violation and ask it to be cured, and if it's not cured, then at that point, we can go in and do that. So it's not meant to be Tom's gonna be driving around with his lawnmower looking for people who didn't mow their lawn well. But at that point, if he issues a violation, you know, and somebody says, no, I really like this meadow and it's not more than 10 inches, which would be in violation of New York state law, you know, then Tom can use his judgment, I think, to, as long as there's no, you know, issue with emergency access or any sort of imminent harm to anybody, then I think that's what's really meant to get at.
I have a question. Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
We hear you.
Oh, okay. I had a problem with my audio earlier and I didn't hear Ed until towards the end of what he said. So I apologize if this is repeating anything. I would just like to understand if we're following New York State law, why that section D needs to be there at all? Did you go, and apologies if you already went over that.
Because so the Well, the New York state law does talk about vegetation in excess of 10 inches, but we in town, we're a bee city, we adopted a monarch pledge. We don't want to discourage people from planting a pollinator garden, for instance, so we're specifically saying if you've intended to do that, we are okay with that, except that obviously if it becomes a hazard for any reason, then, we could go in and look at it and have that discussion.
Yeah, the hazard is there, the section addressing hazard is there, but section D, which says, principal structures shall be maintained free from uncultivated vegetation in excess of 10 inches, does that go beyond state law? That one goes beyond what you just mentioned.
Okay, I think you've actually missed the most important word there. And that is curtilage. So it's the area immediately surrounding. Tom, please chime in at any time here if I've got.
No, I know what that means,
But you omitted the word when you talked about what D says. And it's not that, in principle, that principal structure shall be maintained free. It's just the immediate surrounding area of the home is the key point that was trying to make here, so that first responders can enter a home and without obstruction and without hazard to themselves. It's just the safety issue of it. So if it's a meadow, you can have a meadow, but just keep that area immediately around your house clear enough so that a first responder can come in without hurting themselves.
Yeah, I thought that was covered in a different section. I thought that was covered in section B. And yeah. Let me see.
That just talks about conformity
I don't see
with
it.
New York State.
Sorry.
mean,
Section C. Yeah, that's the safety provision.
Well, that's talking about your steps, your walkways, driveways, things like that.
Okay.
I mean, the state, yeah, go ahead, Tom, sorry.
Excuse me, what is your concern, Gloria?
No, I can't hear him.
Well, my concern is with people who want to grow their garden in a way that's unconventional. And I think you were alluding to that with the word intentional. That's why I wasn't sure if you had addressed that already. My audio wasn't working.
This proposed code change really targeted those properties that have been classified as zombie and have not had any property maintenance in some time. This is really not targeted on the homeowner wishing to have a pollinator garden. In that respect, that could be a cultivated area, much like a flower garden. And in my opinion, if the applicant can show mass identity and location on a property, then we can somehow word that into the code change to allow for the pollinator garden. But we really need to identify where it's going to be, size of it, and somehow define it, either with placards or cobblestones or just neatly cutting around. Something that gives the definition and proudly shows I have a pollinator garden.
So you only want to make an exception for pollinator gardens?
Well, other exceptions, in my opinion, if you are growing roses, that's part of an as of right. That's not, the New York State Code is not looking at that. That's something you have the right to do. You can plant flowering plants. We're looking at unkept properties. And that was where we have numerous complaints from neighbors saying, no one's cutting the property, it's abandoned, it's been abandoned. There are restrictions that I cannot send violations out of state. So a lot of these properties are owned by entities out of state, so it falls on deaf ears, these violations, and they go unkept. And it's unfair to the neighbors. So we're looking for tools to be able to go in and say, after a certain number of days, 30 days, then I can petition the town board stating the cause and problem, and then there's another 10-day stay, and then the board can make a decree saying we can entertain a subcontractor going out there and seeing if it's a one-time problem or a continued use problem. And
I do understand the intention, I'm just, my concern is with unintended consequences of the language. So I completely understand the intent, and what you're saying, but I'm looking at that one section and thinking of an example, for instance, if someone just wants to grow a field of dandelions. You know, it's not conventional, but it's something intentional that the person wants to do.
Right, like
And,
we just mentioned the idea of a meadow. Someone wants to grow a wildflower meadow. That's gonna be different than a pollinator garden.
Right.
So that should be covered for sure. And I just want, we'll note that New York State law does say, except as provided for in local law, all developed areas of premises shall be maintained free from weeds in excess of 10 inches. So we do have that flexibility, and that's, I think, the point of that in section D. I guess one question I've had since the beginning, since this first appeared in the agenda, we are clearly most focused, or at least acutely focused, on zombie properties. But why do we not reference that concept in here? I'm just wondering.
I have the same question.
can I jump in?
Yes.
We have a couple of other owner-occupied properties in town where we've served violations and they've gone in front of the justices and still nothing has been done. So at certain points, we are beside ourselves to make, cleanup. We cannot get these properties to comply. And sending the owners back to court seems almost without merit because we know the outcome is the same. For whatever reason, financially and personal, they cannot do these items.
Right.
So this would give the town an avenue to go in, get the work done, lien the property, and resolve the neighbor concerns.
To that end, Tom, I recall when I was town prosecutor, I had a couple people that didn't maintain their property. And a lot of it was discretionary, meaning the judge and the prosecution giving someone many opportunities, usually was financial, to remedy the situation. It wasn't that the law was not enforceable, it was just that the prosecutors felt that it was just to allow, and the court agreed, to allow this opportunity for this person to rectify the situation. It didn't seem like it was plaguing the town, certainly this is years and years ago. So my question ultimately to you is, how many of these summonses have you issued over the past, half a dozen years, or you're not here half a dozen years, but over the past couple of years, how many have you issued and how many have not been complied with?
There's two properties in specifically that we have this property with, and Prosecutor Miller has worked on one of them, and I think the other prosecutor is working on one in Kipso Park as we speak. And we keep getting in this rabbit hole where we can't get anything corrected, and neighbors keep coming in and making the same complaint over and over, and we keep issuing violations. We'd rather solve problems, but so there's just a few.
So could we, just thinking out loud here, purpose clauses don't really serve that much function, but they certainly could be a signaling mechanism to the town. Could we potentially maybe beef up the purpose section to sort of talk about zombie properties or properties where resident owners have, effectively relinquished maintenance of the property, and then maybe in section D, again, beef up or modify that language to be crystal clear. And again, on that point, I would certainly like to take the input of the Conservation Board, just to see if there are any other examples of, intentional decisions by property owners to do the right thing, and then, make those changes. That would be my suggestion.
But again, isn't it obvious we're trying to deal with properties that are violating, New York State law? And the only way we can, and we're not, again, intending to go in and do that work. There's going to be, a process. There's going to be a violation issue. They have time to cure. And we don't want to do that work. Frankly, our guys have better things to do. So this is just a way that if there is an instance where there's really a problem and we need to do that work, it allows us to do that and recoup the fees that we need to expend.
I agree, I don't think the changes I just suggested change them. The state law allows us to go slightly above and beyond,
Right,
right? And so my only point is, why not just clarify the couple of points where, at least up to now, we've heard input from people who are quite knowledgeable about this, that, this might be sort of overstating the case. And I don't think if we made those changes that would limit Tom's ability to do it in those circumstances that you just described. That's just my thought.
Yeah, and I think Lisa also, I think that it may be obvious what our intentions are, but again, the wording could have unintended consequences for people who like to do things that are considered, unconventional. Like someone mentioned, a wildflower garden or a field of dandelions or something that, might be a question of opinion as to what's unkempt or what's uncultivated.
And what's the standard now? Is it a strict liability standard? With the statute? With the state code, I should actually say. What's the standard? If you run afoul of the 10 inches, it's not intentional. Is it knowing? Is it a strict liability? Is it reckless? What's the standard,
It gets into intent, like you said earlier, and it does talk about, there is a distinction I think you can draw between cultivated and uncultivated, because cultivated does evince an intent to accomplish something. But Tom, I in terms of a standard of proof,
when we receive a complaint, they're usually neighbor generated. We go out, we witness what the complaint is, speak with both parties. If it's a property maintenance where the lawn is in excess of 10 inches, we give the owner a chance to cut the grass. We don't issue violations at first, stating there's a problem. Like I said, most of the time there's no one contact, but in the cases where we have, it's been, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had a hand. There's always some reason, changing gardeners, but they usually come to compliance very quickly. So if the standard is to issue a warning, then issue a violation, and then go to an adherence ticket at that point. Very rarely does this go to an adherence ticket when it comes to property maintenance.
So the bottom, it's a little bit of a different issue. It seems to me that it's a strict liability standard. Is it even knowing? But we can discuss that offline. Because I just think if you throw in intentional, you're just gonna run into some real headaches.
Just too difficult.
Yeah, I think you're just gonna run into real headaches, but we can sort of work that out more.
With the pollinator garden and the 10 inches, Tom and I have had and Dennis have had a number of conversations as to how to skin that cat, and I think those conversations should continue. Tonight is just a work session to get the language as close as we can before we go out to a public hearing, and at that point, I'd expect you to get more comments, more suggestions, possibly from the Conservation Board as to how to get this just right.
The world should have our problems of
Right.
I mean, is this meant to get it, I have plenty of neighbors who've decided, obviously, that they don't wanna use pesticides, they don't want, they wanna have natural lawns, even though they do mow them, but they don't mind the dandelions and they don't mind like the pretty flat wildflowers that are beginning to grow. But this isn't meant to get at that. We're not telling people you must use pesticides and get rid of every weed on your property. We're saying if growth gets out of hand in such a manner that it's actually a violation of state law, we want to ask you to remedy that because it is a violation of state law and we need to be able to, in areas where it really gets out of hand, we may need to rectify that situation, and this would allow us to recoup any money spent on that, correct? If somebody wants an entire lawn of dandelions, this is not meant to say you can't do that, correct?
That's all right, and I think by and large, these are hypothetical issues. We don't have these sort of fine line distinctions, but since the town board is gonna commit this to law, we do have to think about those what ifs. So, and again, Tom and I and Dennis have talked about that and how to, in that rare situation where it's necessary to distinguish between the the example you just gave with, trying to accomplish something versus the bad actor who says, no, really, I'm trying to accomplish something, but they're really not. How to craft the law to try to get to that situation, to allow Tom or a court to deal with it effectively.
Which is why, if someone would have an opportunity to respond to a citation, then they would respond and say, no, I am intentionally doing this and here's what I'm doing. It doesn't pose a safety hazard, and I think that would be, one mechanism to avoid that issue. And to your point, Lisa, I agree that state law is flexible, and we're revisiting this because we're concerned about enforcement mechanisms, but by revisiting it, we're opening it up for discussion in an environment where people are doing a lot of things that 5 years ago would have been considered, harebrained or unconventional. I think we should address that, that's all. Which I think D does, but I think we could beef it up a little bit. And maybe, my thought would be in the purpose clause, give a little bit of, kind of precatory language that explains what we're trying to accomplish, to your point, Lisa. We're not trying to just go after people who, actually want dandelions and wildflowers. That's not the purpose.
So we could certainly add something to the purpose provision, and I think that's the place to put it, including but not limited to zombie property, something to that effect. In terms of D, does the board wanna workshop this again, or do you wanna set it down for a public hearing and continue that discussion then?
Do we normally workshop it before you set a public hearing?
Well, we have it, there's a resolution in the packet to set it down for a public hearing on
I think that the change is not gonna
August
be,
9th.
Cultivated versus intentional. I think we can tinker with that language while I think the intent behind that is still the same, so
Yeah.
I'm comfortable going to a public hearing and just, working on that language a little bit, or potentially other people have a thought as to what that word should be.
Is August 9th, does that feel like enough time to solicit that comment?
Yeah, we're not
So-
closing it out on August 9th, right?
No, but I
we
just
don't
wanna make sure the
open it.
board's okay with that date,
I think so.
Yeah.
2 weeks, okay.
Sounds good.
Is planned a word we would consider rather than intentional?
I would just say that, and I don't know if Tara, seems like you agree, the concern with intentional is everyone's gonna walk in here and say, I did it intentionally.
Exactly.
No, I agree
You
with
ain't
you.
gonna beat that prosecutor, because how the heck are you gonna disprove?
I'm actually thinking cultivated might be the right word,
But it's,
but I
but the
understand.
nature of those gardens is that it's uncultivated.
Yeah, so, anyway, we should discuss this more, again, we have.
I think a public hearing would be helpful
Yes.
because we would get input, from the conservation board and others, that would be helpful in wordsmithing.
Totally agree.
So we'll add reference the zombie properties in the purpose, and otherwise we'll prefer getting a public hearing.
And then did you just wanna talk about 93 dash six?
The redlining got a little bit, so 93-6 was a provision to deal with the emergency situation where we don't have time for the process that's laid out in C, where there's and B and C, where there's a 30-day and 10-day, as Tom mentioned earlier. E is intended to replace 93-6, so
Okay.
that should have been redlined out.
And again, just for the public, that's meant to get at, in my view, would be where there's a real emergency there and we need like such as a tree falling and nobody's around and it's on wires or whatever it may be, and we need to go in and do that quickly.
Yes.
That's what that's really meant to get at. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, anything from you, Tom? Anything else?
The only thing that came to mind is we could use some sort of variance mechanism to allow for this. You know, that's more of a chapter 60 zoning board. But do we want to do something inclusive into 93, allowing for, you know, some a board to look at it?
I hadn't thought about that.
To do a variance for what, like a pollinator garden, you mean?
Exactly, because the law reads in black and white. If someone is objecting and wants to do something that's not typical, if we have a mechanism where they can go in front of the board to suggest what they're proposing, and if the board agrees with it, then maybe we could allow that to happen, similar to what the zoning board does for the project.
But Tom, isn't that your call though, as the enforcement officer?
I don't have the flexibility, I have to read and interpret the code. So when things are not a perfect fit, I have to err on the side of, you know, what the code says and most likely deny. Where a panel of board members may be able to research and allow for a different outcome.
But it's not zoning. Can I suggest that you and I talk about that
Absolutely.
offline? I haven't thought about it before now.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right,
Thanks, Tom.
okay, thank you. All right, so shall we move on to Chappaqua Crossing?
Yep, sorry, yes.
Lisa, I have a question for you before you move on, because my audio only started to work when you were talking about pollinator. You know,
That's the only thing we discussed so far.
Okay,
Yes,
got it, okay, thank you.
thank you.
Ed, I'm actually gonna throw the next one back to you.
Okay.
To talk about the public hearings on Chappaqua Crossing, thanks.
So there are two resolutions in the packet tonight. One on referring a local law that would potentially do two things. One, reduce or eliminate the restriction on carryout restaurants. And the other one had to do with the sale of liquor. And the way that resolution is drafted to allow the board to discuss whether one or both of those proposed local law amendments would be advanced and referred out and set down for a public hearing, because I think the takeaway from the last two work sessions, I'm not sure there was a clear consensus as to, especially with respect to the liquor. So we wanted to allow some time on the work session agenda tonight for the board to finish that discussion. And there's a separate resolution, because the process is a little bit different, for amending the MFPD PCP to allow for the change that the applicant is proposing with respect to the Wright Guest House.
Okay, so we can definitely workshop them, but what we're looking to do tonight is refer both of those items to with respect to the carry out and the liquor store to the town planning board and the Westchester County Planning Board, and then with respect to the guest house to those people as well as our architectural review board.
Yes, on the zoning, actually the resolution should have mentioned the Newcastle Planning Board as well as the Westchester County Planning Board, so that's correct. On the guest house, the process is a little bit different to amend a PDCP. That will stay with the town board until the amendment, if and when the amendment is approved, it would go to the planning board for a site plan amendment. Before that, the board during its workshops had talked about possibly referring it to the architectural review board, because after all, that's the board with the expertise on architectural issues. And that is an optional referral, but it's in the resolution for the board's consideration.
Okay, and then we would have a public hearing for the guest house. We don't need a public hearing, correct, for the
Oh, you do.
or do we for the
You do. You need
floor
you
area?
certainly needed for the zoning amendments, and we're recommending that if the guest house
We do it
part
for
of the
both.
application advances, that be subject to a public hearing as well.
Well, I think that's a good idea, I'm all for public hearings. Okay, so what are everyone's thoughts on this?
So, Lisa, I'm not sure I'm allowed to speak, I was just gonna update everyone on a few things, if
Sure,
it's
hi
okay.
Felix.
Hi, so you asked us to do some analysis of what the potential increase in traffic would be if we had more folks taking food out versus eating food in.
Yes.
And Hyman is in the middle of doing that with Peter Rasulo. We should have that shortly. We'll probably get that to you and then we would present it at the public hearing. So that's relative to the takeout issue. On the liquor, what we've done is we've done an analysis of our shoppers at Whole Foods, where they're coming from, to hopefully demonstrate that by allowing us to sell liquor at Chappaqua Crossing, it will not be invasive or detrimental necessarily to one or two stores in downtown. In other words, the majority of our shoppers are coming from elsewhere, not from primarily from Chappaqua. And then just relative to the guest house, we've got structural engineers doing openings of various sections of the foundation. And we're expecting to be able to render some sort of report to you that would support some of our positions of whether it makes sense or not to retain the building or to tear it down. So all of that's coming to you, and all of that will be there before that hearing on the 13th, which I believe was the list of things you asked us to do.
Yes, thank you. Alright, so I had asked Ed to, the resolutions in the packet does talk about eliminating the maximum floor area. And I had asked Ed to add, what word did I ask?
Reduce.
Or reduce, thank you. Eliminate or reduce the maximum floor area or modify. Is reduce the right word? Increase, I think it's increase the maximum floor area.
Yeah,
Right.
in the aggregate,
So which gives us the option to obviously further discuss it. We haven't had public hearings, we're not going to certainly make a decision tonight. This is really just to kind of refer it and open a public hearing or, set a public hearing. But if anyone on the board has thoughts, we'd love to hear them.
I personally think this is putting the cart before the horse. I'm not sure why we would set a public hearing and have a proposed resolution, especially this one, which includes language that I don't think there's any consensus to pursue. So I don't know why we would even do this until if Felix has more information that could be relevant, certainly would like to see it. But I don't know. I typically, when we get to this stage, at least the 6 months that I've been on the board, I typically feel like we've come to some majority consensus to move it forward. And I definitely don't think we have on these 2 points, or the Right House. So that's just my view. I'm not sure why we're proposing this for public hearing when
Well, that's why we're having the work session on it.
Well,
To
we're
talk
having
about it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So if we're having a work session to decide whether to do this, my thought would be no.
No, it's
No on
premature
setting,
to
no
refer
on
it.
setting a public hearing on this
Mhm.
particular resolution, yeah, or the Right House resolution.
Has everyone on the board gotten a chance, have you gotten a chance to see the Right House?
No, I haven't, I'm actually planning on trying to go.
Okay.
I think the visits happened while I was away, so.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. And Vicky, did you get a chance to see it?
I did. I saw it at the same time as Chris did.
Okay.
I certainly don't feel ready to put the liquor amendment for public hearing or the Right House at this point.
So maybe Felix, when do you anticipate having that? You said by the public hearing, but what date? Do you think you can get that to us soon?
Everybody's, obviously we're navigating vacations. Are we? I'm confused, because normally in work sessions, we're normally not allowed to even speak, or is that,
Well,
so in other words.
but this is, you're kind of germane to the discussion here.
So would the board be happy or less unhappy if we came back in a work session and we shared a lot of this information with you? So, we're happy to do that. This was just scheduled tonight, so they told me to show up, and here I am.
I think it would be helpful for the board. We certainly couldn't make a decision without that information. So I think it would be helpful for the board to have that. Now, do you necessarily need to come present it? I don't know, you could present it with a cover memo as well. I don't know that you have to show up in person.
I think having it in advance and having an opportunity for the board to review and come to the work session with questions and it would be,
Yeah.
would make for a more robust discussion.
So I think you're hearing, send it to us when you have it. We would like a chance to review it and then have you come to a work session.
Okay, so if I'm allowed a quid pro quo, I think a tour of the guest house speaks volumes. And given the magnitude of the ask and the decision and our professionals' opinions, we would respectfully ask that any voting member come and take a tour of that house. So, in terms of what we're being asked to say versus whether it's savable.
Yep, I think we've all seen it, other than Tara. She was away when the meetings were scheduled, so we can schedule another meeting. I think Dave might be on vacation, but I'm sure we can find someone else to take her.
He's back this Friday.
Great. I'm happy to come this week or next, whatever works.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'll email, I'm gonna email you, Lisa, or just email Jill, whatever, I'll get you an update when that stuff is available. It's not exactly exciting reading, but I would guess in a couple of weeks we have all of that.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, you can email Jill and me, whatever you would prefer.
Okay.
Can I just,
Alright.
sorry, can I just ask about, so also for.
Can you just come so
Yeah,
people can
sorry.
hear you, who are at home?
Yes, hi, Diana Kohler from Del Bella Denellen, also for Heitman and for Chappaqua Crossing. Just procedurally speaking, I know that the planning board was going to get a referral or, at which point does the planning board play into this so that we can all be reviewing this information? Because if we're preparing the traffic, and any parking analysis or anything else that your board would wanna see, I just wanna know at what point does the planning board come into this review?
At the point the matter is set down for a public hearing. The same resolution
Okay, so
typically.
you want all of this then upfront now
Mhm.
for review, and then when you're ready to submit it, then it'll be put on to refer to the planning board. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we were addressing all of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
These agendas, all these days, we saw the September 13th date, which is quite a ways out, and we get that information into you, is that still a date we can kind of make? That was also a little bit of our concern, is just trying to get, whether or not you guys ultimately approve it or not, at least if we get onto the place where we have a hearing, we have an opportunity to make our case.
We can definitely get you on that date.
Alright, well, maybe it's time to start another big ass project.
Assuming you get me assuming you get the board the information that we need prior to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Felix.
Thanks, Felix.
The
Right.
13th was available. 13th was available.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Why wouldn't it be?
Okay. We had put it down for the 20th, and I remember some discussion about.
Wait, is that Rosh Hashanah?
Well, at that meeting in September, whenever it may be, you will be on the agenda. Obviously, if we're not having a meeting that day.
We had, no, Rosh Hashanah is the last week. It's the 25th.
Yeah, it's the
It is.
26th, so yeah, we don't have a meeting that last week in September. Okay, but we do have one on the 13th, and Christina already had it on public hearing for Chappaqua Crossing already listed for the 13th.
So let's move it to a work
Now,
session.
that's the only thing is that, as we mentioned earlier, when the planning board, when we do come back in person, the planning board will be meeting in person in this room on the 13th, so that.
That's okay.
You sure about that? It's usually the second.
I don't know, that's why I haven't done it, because
Maybe they're
I
doing
think that's why we had put it for the 20th, because of the planning board.
So the
Is that,
planning
but
board's
is that
in
a
this
work
room.
session or a
You wanna
public
be in that
meeting?
room.
Why
It
can't we
should
do it in
be,
there?
you know what, I don't know, I think
Too many people come to this
because
small room and people-
Not for a public hearing, we're just talking about for a work session.
oh, we had it down for public hearing on the
Right,
13th.
right,
Yeah,
right.
for work session, the 20th is
That's
fine.
actually-
That's fine.
The
So either
13th
one.
for a work session.
Yeah.
Because you guys will get us that information, we can review it, then we'll have that opportunity to discuss it with you. And then at that point, we can decide if we wanna resolve to bring it forward to a public hearing.
So it's not gonna be on the 13th.
Make sense?
Yeah, no, fine. So we'll move it to the 20th.
Okay.
So Felix knows it's the 20th, not the 13th? You good with that?
No, it's the
I'm sorry.
13th.
What's the 13th?
Okay, but just to be in there.
The work
It's-
Cause it's only gonna be a work session, it's not a public hearing.
Okay, we'll do both. Okay, fine.
Okay.
At that time, we may decide to set a public hearing for the future, but we won't do it at that time,
Got it.
The 13th.
right?
Right.
All good.
Is the 13th is a work session, correct? I'm looking.
No, it's a town
Town
board
board.
meeting. That's what the confusion was. It doesn't matter.
Oh.
We can have a work session. The 6th is going to be the first meeting in September.
Mhm.
And then the next week is the 13th, so that would be our town board meeting. And then the 20th, we would do a combination because we're not meeting the last.
So how about, can we get in front of y'all on September 6th? You guys don't work in August, so I guess can we come get in front of a work session on
We
September
work all the
6th?
time, we may not meet that often in August, but we're working constantly.
Well, okay, I'm not gonna quarrel with that, but can we meet on the 6th at your work session, and depending on everybody's appetite, that might allow you to sit down
Okay,
a
so
public hearing somewhat immediately thereafter.
so our issue with the 6th is that we're waiting for the county executive to tell us whether or not we're gonna have our airport master plan outreach at the Chappaqua is either gonna be the 6th or the 7th, depending upon the county executive's availability.
Okay, so this
Yeah.
is how we're gonna resolve this. You're gonna get us the information as soon as possible, and we will get you on the agenda as soon as possible thereafter.
Okay,
We will
don't
let you know
plan
what
on
date.
parking, don't plan on parking at Chappaqua if I haven't had a chance to appear before you.
Okay,
Why don't we just put it on for the 6th, we can always move it.
we'll know as it gets closer what the agenda is due. You don't need the decision right now, what date it is. Just get us the information, and as soon as we can get it on, we will get it on the agenda.
I'll
Thank
pencil you for
you.
the 6th.
Okay?
Thank you.
So then this is off
This is why you work with pencil
I
and
know,
I have
it's
pen.
just
That's why my-
Okay.
Thank you. It's too late. Okay.
All right, and would you like to discuss some administrative items?
A series of administrative items. I will go through them as quickly as I can. We start with the payment of claims, adoption of minutes for June of 2022. The police are attending a conference. The next is authorization to purchase services for aluminum sludge removal. This is because it's a large ticket item. It's $18,750. And we're just letting the board know that this is something that we've anticipated. It's in our operating budget, but just to bring it to the board's attention. We are soliciting proposals for anthracite filter media and filter sand that's at the Millwood Water Treatment Plant. It's part of the filtration process. We're going to be awarding a bid for building cleaning services to a new vendor. It's actually the second lowest bidder. We had to disqualify the first lowest bidder because it was impossible for him to perform it using prevailing wage, which is a requirement of any contract with the town. We are happy to be able to finally award RFP services, professional engineering services for a number of proposed water main replacement projects, and that's gonna go to H2N Engineering for $214,000. There's also an authorization to establish a capital project for the water main replacement on Pine Cliff, Meadow, Alden, and Ridge Road. Collectively, we're anticipating that project to come in just under 1.8. It's authorized for 1.795. There's an authorization to purchase water materials. We keep materials in stock for water main breaks and hydrant replacements and things of that nature, so this is just replenishing our supplies. We've got authorization to release a small performance bond from Conifer. Let's see, we've got a couple of these flashing beacons that New York State DOT has approved for us to put in as part of the Millwood sidewalk project. It's gonna go in by down by Spaccarelli's, the east and western side of the Swim River Parkway by Millwood Park, by the entrance there. So it'll make that crosswalk much safer. Next is our staff has been tremendously busy working on the submission of grants. And what we've got for you tonight is a resolution in support of it's WQIP and a CFA submission regarding the purchase of a combination vacuum truck. Assemblyman Burdick's office has been just a fabulous partner and so proactive with us trying to hunt down every grant dollar available. And so you're gonna see a number of grant applications mentioned in this agenda. Next is authorization, to obtain bids for the 2023 coach bus contract. It's for senior trips and things of that nature, ski trips like that. And authorization to award bids for the 2022 bus contract. Better late than never. We had it, we just didn't award it. So sorry about that. Didn't formally award it, but obviously the kids have all been bussed. The next is another resolution approving a request for grant funding for the replacement of the roof at the Chappaqua Performing Arts Center and other improvements and capital repairs from Assemblyman Chris Burdick's office through the capital funding projects. Authorization to purchase pin flags to demarcate no-mow weed whack areas on town lands. There had been some discussion about this. Inadvertently, some milkweed had been removed from the downtown area. So Sabrina came up with the terrific idea of just having these little pin flags that we'll be able to put in. We'll distribute them to people in the know, and our DPW, our parks rather, are anxious to have them out and about. They know about them, and whether they see them, they will be not being mowing or weed whacking. So I think it's a good resolution to that issue. And last but not least, authorization to approve agreement with Evening Out. Evening Out has been renting the conference room at the Chappaqua Performing Arts Center. So for the last 2 months of July and August, they actually are going to be, instead of paying us, they're going to be working it out in trade. They have donated to us a lighting board, which is something that they don't need, that we do need, and is up and operational in the Chappaqua. So it's a great deal. So that's all I have for the work session, if anyone's got any questions. And I just did want to mention to the board, I had circulated it about Community Day on September 17th. You are gonna get a notification, but for your committees, if you could just, I circulated applications. The committees just need to let us know that they would like to participate in Community Day. The town picks up the fees for it. We just wanna make sure we have enough tables and tents and the weights for the tents in anticipation of the date.
And each committee just needs to guarantee that they'll be manning their own table, otherwise they are more than welcome to sit with the Town of Newcastle table.
Sure.
We just don't wanna have empty tables sitting there,
So if you could just ask your committees, which ones are coming, we just wanna make sure that we include everyone. And we're very excited to have a terrific turnout from our boards and commissions, so it's pretty great. Okay.
Alright, anything else for work session?
Move
Okay.
to adjourn and open up the town board meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Alright, welcome everybody to our town board meeting of July 26th. Welcome, come on in.
7:30 on the button.
We are on time, look at that. So we already did that. Announcements, any announcements still?
No, I just have sure, you want me to do mine now? Yeah, okay.
Sure.
So just a couple of housekeeping things. Town hall offices will be closed to the public tomorrow for Records Retention Day. the law actually requires us to take and toss certain records. There's a schedule of maintenance and certain things we have to keep and certain things we have to discard. And so it is the retention and disposition schedule for New York local government records. Used to be called the MU1, but it's some light reading just in case you wanna know. Yeah, your kid, this is literally what she has to follow, it's unbelievable. Anyway, and there's no town board meeting next week, our next meeting will be on Tuesday, August 9th. And just an update on Sustainable Westchester, Lisa, I didn't know if you were gonna mention it in your.
I was.
Okay, then I'll let you go to it, okay, I'm done then.
All right, thank you. I am gonna hold most of my supervisor's report, though I did want to mention that we let people know a while ago that our contract for the provision of electric with Sustainable Westchester had expired, so everyone's prices were going up. They have been hard at work trying to get new bids, and they were successful. We are waiting to hear from them and get a little more information about that. There will be more information in my supervisor's report, but I would imagine that actually these rates are pretty competitive, and they're below even with the 100% renewable, which is what I would recommend to the board, that we adopt the 100% renewable option, which is what we've done in the past. They're well below what the market rates are going to be. So we're very excited that this happened. It's going to be, I think, a 2-year contract. We will have more information coming forward, but it's a really great development. So I'm happy that that worked out. And we're gonna have a lot in the supervisor's report this week, so please make sure to look at it. Also, if you have not signed up for the newsletters, please make sure to do that. If you go to Get Connected on our website, you can sign up for newsletters, very, very important. Under our community corner, I just wanted to wish a happy 11th birthday to Elizabeth Gordon and a happy 12th birthday to Jasper Gottlieb. Make sure to look for your names on the electric sign, and then personally, while it was out there, I didn't actively announce it to embarrass my own child, who did turn 18 and is no longer a child in the eyes of the law. Thank you. That is it. Please make sure to look for your best wishes on the electronic sign. Again, for children, it will only have your first name and your last initial at the request of the Chappaqua Central School District. I think that is it initially. So we are going to move to public comment, new business, not related to the public hearing that we are going to open shortly. So does anyone either in person here or online have any public comments or new business? Okay, seeing no one in the peanut gallery here, is there anyone online? If you do have public comment, please raise your digital hand.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, and just before we move forward, I want to thank town staff and actually everyone in town for looking out for neighbors and each other during what was a terrible heat wave. Hopefully that has broken, knock on wood, but thank you again. I know it was not an easy week or so thank you. Okay, so having no public comment or new business, we're now going to move to our public hearing. Can I have a motion from the board to open our public hearing on a local law to amend Chapter 62, Section 2 of the Town Code of the Town of Newcastle to establish a monetary threshold for the new Newcastle stretch code?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Ed, do you want to walk us through this briefly?
Sure, this is a local law amendment that the board workshopped at its last meeting. And it was an initiative that was brought forward by Tom DePole in response to concerns that he had that based on feedback he was getting from contractors and some residents, that there were gonna be small projects in the town that might where it might be a hardship because of the costs or the lead times involved in sourcing some products to require stretch code compliance. So the idea was to find a dollar amount below which a project wouldn't have to meet those requirements. I know Tom is here and let him speak to it. He and I worked through an interpretation issue on one provision of the stretch code, but I think Tom still believes that this is something that could be of value to residents, and I'll turn it over to him.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Good evening, members of the board. As the building inspector and certified code official, I am charged with reviewing applications for compliance and enforcing building permits and conditions. In the duties as I described, I've been contacted by owners, applicants, landlords to see if there's any relief from the stretch code for some of these smaller projects. The owners and applicants have cited that compliance has become difficult in some respects, almost causing projects that have caused projects to be stopped or delayed permanently in the realms of procuring windows, certain types of windows. We did have a dilemma and a concern with air conditioning and heating systems. I was able to get some clarifications from NYSERDA, so therefore that is no longer an issue, and we can move past that. But what is still paramount is that we have parts of our town that don't have the same style homes as other parts of the town, and there are less value in those homes. And these owners and applicants are willing to follow the 2020 codes and whatever the New York State code is at the time, but they feel like they're being pressured because of the stretch code mandate that they have to do more. In one example, we have a few bathrooms that need to be renovated, and they would like to change their windows. Now, there are windows available in stock in many suppliers that don't have to be special ordered, but to comply with the stretch code, you do need special order to get that special use factor to be compliant. So in discussions with Ed Phillips and other members of the town staff, it was thought that if we could give an entry level relief financial amount, then we could assist in some of those smaller projects giving relief.
And Tom, how did you arrive at the $50,000 threshold that's been
In
proposed?
today's financial market, even the smaller projects are coming in at big cost numbers. So we needed to cap it so that it really was only for small projects. If someone wants to do their bathroom, there is no more than 5,000 to 7,000 bathroom makeover. It's more like 25, 35. So with a little margin of error to include a possible small kitchen, that's where the 50,000 came from.
Okay.
And that's the aggregate cost of the project. So the window may be a small part of the project, but it is part of the aggregate cost.
Right. And do we have any insight as to if, and again, this is a public hearing, so we're not making a decision tonight, but if this were adopted, do we have any insight as to whether that would disqualify our points that we receive for adopting this code?
What I can tell you is that the code council has been favorable to allowing this to happen. I cannot answer your question about being disqualified. I don't have that information.
Okay. All right, any comments from the board before we open this up?
Yeah, Tom, a couple questions. What other municipalities have you spoken with that has raised this issue, and what specific examples have they provided to you that this has become an issue financially or in terms of securing the particular window or whatever it may be in a timely fashion?
I've spoken with other building inspectors from different municipalities, none of which have pushed this through. They've talked about it, but then fell short of it. So, as a representative for the town of Newcastle, I felt compelled to try to help those that had at least asked of the
But to clarify, my question is, what examples have you been provided and anything with specificity?
It was again mainly, originally it was relating to a lot of the HVAC systems that the other building inspectors had the same problem because it was really not clear from NYSERDA what was applicable or not applicable.
But that's not applicable now, correct?
We've gotten clearance and NYSERDA has sent out some clarifications to us to allow for projects to move forward without the delay. But it's still the windows, and it could be possible future legalizations of properties. Because we've been able to legalize properties under current and previous codes. If, in fact, we go forward and, let's say 5 years from now, someone needs to legalize a sunroom that they've built, and all the glass they put in there is not compliant, maybe the project fell under the $50,000 category because the sunroom was pre-existing and they just closed it, then we could at that point issue relief because you weren't obligated to the stretch code, you were only obligated to the 2020 ending code.
Has
Please go ahead.
Has anyone provided you, whether a homeowner or a contractor, the price difference for a particular window or the time in ordering or the back order of a particular window? So if I'm getting, I'm not a contractor, but 3 feet by 3 feet window, whatever may be standard, I don't know. That there's a price difference between the more efficient window. What is that price difference? And that they've been advised that it's something that's going to take X amount of time to get, as opposed to something that might be in stock.
Absolutely. With the major players, Anderson, Marvin, and Pella Windows. So let's deal with Anderson. There are Windorama, Home Depot, Gilco that have a stocking line of windows they have that they can pull a specific size, hand it to you. It meets the 2020 energy code. If you need to order a special window, special order, you're looking anywhere from, I'm going to say 8 to 12 weeks is the latest time frame I've heard special order.
But that would be applicable to any custom window?
Yes. So if you were doing your bathroom and you needed this, they have a stock window, you could not take advantage of it. You have to wait that time frame to get the custom window.
And the price difference?
It's probably anywhere between like a $40 and $80 difference. It really depends on the style of window, single pane, wide light, there's some detail.
Thank you.
Hey Tom, just and I don't know if you have this information handy, but just to get a little color on how small the projects are that you're talking about, over the course of a year, again, if this is anecdotal, maybe you have a sense of it. Over the course of a year, how many permits come to you? And, if you had to guess, how many are below 50,000?
We probably see about 300-400 applications of permits a quarter. So there could be over 1,000 permits a year, but not all of them are for building permits. You have electrical, mechanical, and others. And we probably see a good 200 permits over the year for bathrooms and kitchens.
So, right, what I'm trying to understand is, I guess you don't see, when someone puts in a permit, do you know what the cost estimate is?
They have to establish the cost estimate for the building permit. So yes, they'll tell us the relative cost of the project.
Right, so I guess what I'm trying to understand is, if 200 are for bathrooms and kitchens, then the balance are for larger projects?
And related permits, electrical, plumbing, mechanical,
Right.
yes.
And of the 300 to 400, again, using rough numbers, say 1,000 per year, what number do you think would fall below the 50,000? Roughly, again, just rough estimates.
I'm gonna say 10 to 15%.
Now, again, I'm now thinking out loud for a second, Tom. So if someone needs a custom window in a bathroom, they're still gonna have to have that on back order regardless. And if it needs to be the higher grade or higher quality, more efficient window, you're talking about $40 to $80. And I can only speak of my bathrooms, which have, I think, one, maybe two windows. You're not talking a lot of windows, and if it's custom, you're waiting anyway. So it seems to be the practical reality of a small project is that it's not gonna really be a financial difference because the window, we're using windows as an example, because it's a nominal cost all in when you consider all the other factors. And if it's custom, then it's certainly somewhat inconsequential because they're gonna have to wait regardless. So you're talking about maybe, if accurate, 4 to 8 weeks or whatever you had mentioned to do a project or handle a project. And again, anecdotally, I think that there's probably a lot of contractors who are busy now regardless. It's not as if every bathroom or kitchen that needs to be updated is an exigent circumstance that needs immediate window replacement. So it seems that the impact of this is relatively nominal. $40, $80, even if it's on 3 windows, and 4 to 8 week wait is not that significant.
I think what Tom was saying is that if somebody is doing a standard window now that is in stock, they cannot do that. They will have to wait the 6 to 8 weeks because by definition, the stretch code compliant windows right now are
8 to 12.
special, and
Right.
theirs are 8 to 12.
So, right, I get that. But generally speaking, contractors aren't starting on day one when you come in and you assess and review and you do whatever you're gonna plan and submit your permit. It takes time. So it's not as if, make sure everything's equal. It's not as if, Tom, you're coming in on day one and on day 3 you're starting a project. There's probably a time frame between approval and actually commencing that project. And there may be other things they need to order that are on back order. So it's not on an island either. So again, it seems to me that we're not talking some significant numbers and overall significant time when you're throwing all the other factors, in my opinion.
You are correct, this is a very fluid situation. The lead times vary depending on the economy. Normal lead times are usually 4 to 6 weeks, in the past for ordering product. They have increased with supply chain issues. The stretch code really doesn't correlate to supply chain. The stretch code correlates to energy usage. The de minimis amount between using a stock window and a stretch code window is, I believe, a 0.5 in the thermal rating. So it's a very small amount. If you were just purchasing a few windows, you're mandated to follow the 2020 energy code. We were looking to offer relief so that you could do a project quicker if you needed to and be able to comply with the current code, not the stretch code. So it's not really a financial savings, it's more of a convenience. We all understand long lead items as a contractor for over 40 years. When you sign a contract, that's when you place your order for a long lead item, not before. So if there was a way that you could use stock items, then projects could move quicker. It could be the difference between starting a project in June while the kids are, out of school or having to wait in September when there's chaos. So it's just intended to help our town owners and landlords be able to get things done.
So I guess as we explore what the impact would be from a financial standpoint and the length of time it takes to actually complete a project, on the flip side, what would the adverse impact be in terms of energy usage and really combating climate change? Are we talking about a significant impact there, when we look at the size of these projects?
I think that's the wrong way to look at it because it's significant by penny by penny by penny, by brick by brick by brick, it's significant. I mean, we've looked at the leaf blowers and things like that we've addressed before. On an island, you're right, it's not gonna change that much, but it's a collective aggregate that does. So and it's also the principle of it. This community is, at least since I've been on the board, and Lisa's probably been before, we've always been very forward thinking on these fronts. So I understand that there's issues now in supply chain, but I don't think that raises to the level, even if as an island, that 1 or 2 or 3 windows in a particular project doesn't, and we're using that as an example, there may be other things too, but doesn't make a huge impact. The whole idea of the stretch code is that it's collectively, when it gets adopted by all different municipalities, that collectively it has that impact. So I think that's, at least that's why I look at it.
So Tom, related to the question about how many projects, might fall below that, I guess, threshold, you mentioned the last time, this notion of someone wanting to put in air conditioning ducts and effectively having the cost double, right? And effectively rendering the project moot, right? Someone's gonna spend, 10 or 15,000 and suddenly they have to spend 30,000, it's just not worth it. But that's obviously been okayed as, I guess, an alteration. Other than, windows, then what are we talking about here? In other words, a few weeks of extra lead time and some incremental cost, it's definitely an inconvenience. But are there other examples where strict compliance would effectively render a project moot? Or prohibitively expensive relative to the overall project itself?
Excuse me, not under the $50,000 benchmark. Once you're talking about additions, new homes, their costs put them over that threshold very quickly. So those projects must comply and shall comply. It's the few projects where we have seen, even with the past energy code, some owners have opted not to change their windows because it was just too expensive or too difficult, and therefore we made no small change. You still have that old drafty window in a beautiful bath.
Right, no, I get that. I guess what I was trying to understand is, the example that this sort of generated this discussion was, again, the AC ducts in an unfinished attic, for example. Are there others where, a $5,000 or $10,000 project suddenly becomes a $20,000 project because of stretch code compliance?
In the realm of new additions and buildings, yes, you are required, but we've adopted the stretch code.
Right. New additions and buildings are way past that threshold anyway.
Correct.
Right. I'm saying if we adopt a $50,000 threshold, are we addressing scenarios where someone was gonna spend 10 or 15, now has to spend 25 or 30 and won't do it, if the AC duct issue is taken off the table?
Probably wouldn't get to that height of cost, because you still have to reach the insulation values that are required. But, in the realm of alterations, there are other reliefs in the existing building code. So, no, the answer is gonna be that you're not gonna see other avenues other than windows that are really applicable.
Okay. Thank you, that's super helpful. Jeremy, to your point,
Can I wait before everybody, can I
Vicky,
can I
just
have
let-
a question?
Just let Chris finish his thought and then I'll call him.
Okay, I just wanted another data point before we start talking about, opinions, so, but I can wait.
You know what, since we're talking data points, yeah, that's perfect, I'll yield my time. I'll yield my time to the senator from Chappaqua. And then ask the chair if I could have 1 minute back at the end.
We will consider it. Vicky?
Okay, what does that mean? Can I ask my question?
Yes.
It's okay, but in terms of the data point, I just want to get a little bit more clarity, so Tom, you did say that there are about 200 permits for bath and kitchens. I'm just curious how many there have been since we passed the stretch code, and of those, within the monetary threshold. And of those, how many have decided not to pursue their project?
There's a very small number, probably less than a half a dozen, that have not pursued their projects. And some are related to the stretch code, some are related to architectural drawings being required. The total
So
cost.
they're not, well, how many are related to the stretch code?
I'm going to probably say 6.
And how about legalizations, Tom?
Well, that's an ongoing battle that we deal with every day. And legalizations are based on the code of the time of construction. So if we were to base legalizations on the stretch code, they would all fail instantly. But if we were to look 5 years in the future, legalizations have to match the code at the time. So the stretch code is far more advanced than the 2020 energy code in requirements of the glass media used in the U factor of the glass. So it will present some interesting times going forward where owners will have to physically replace window sashes or complete window units because there is not a film at the moment to correct that.
So if I could finish, Tom, are you saying that we have 6 projects that didn't go forward because there was a $40 to $80 increment in the cost of the windows, and they had to wait 8 to maybe 12 weeks to start? Is that?
Well, Victoria, it really wasn't so much the cost, that's very minimal. It was the fact that they had to wait, in those points, it was at least 12 weeks, sometimes up to 16, because of the special window needed. So therefore, they decided not to do the project.
Okay.
Chris?
So I just wanted to just comment, Jeremy, in response to what you said to Tara. I don't think it's the wrong way to think about it. I think we always have to think about it that way, and I think the stretch code is like a grand slam. And I'm less convinced that this threshold is necessary after what Tom just described and after NYSERDA's clarification, so we're probably gonna get to the same place, to be honest. But I think this is a useful exercise. I thought it was a useful exercise 4 months ago when we first discussed the stretch code. I don't think we can say we need to do everything absolutely possible because we in Chappaqua are gonna solve the climate problem, the climate crisis. I think we should do everything we can, but we always have to balance residents and their concerns and real issues and hardships. And if we saw a bunch of people, and more likely, as Tom said, in more modest homes that have lower values, doing smaller projects, being forced to make these really tough decisions, then to me that's worthwhile to consider. And 10 or 15% of those projects to me is not, I know it's bit by bit, penny by penny, and I agree with you, large scale, but I don't think that's an unnecessary consideration. And if we were able to do this and code council said it was okay and therefore still be in compliance and still maintain our certifications and our points and make this accommodation, if those really were hardships, then that home run, that grand slam becomes a 3-run homer, in my opinion. And that's a win, no matter what. So I don't think it's an unnecessary way or an inappropriate way to think about it. I think it is appropriate. That said, after hearing this discussion, I'm at least personally much less inclined to want to pursue this, but.
And I don't really disagree with what you just said either. You do have to take the time to analyze it, because if it's not something that's achievable for financial reasons and it's a real burden, then it doesn't happen. I'm in agreement. It's not our job to force ourselves and our opinions upon everybody. It needs to be carefully analyzed. So to your point, I do agree with that. And we are coming to the same place, especially now hearing, we keep going back to the data points about what the real impact is and where we are.
All right, is there anyone in the audience who has any comments?
Hi, Jennifer Mavis Flag.
co-chair of the Sustainability Advisory Board, and we have comments. So the Sustainability Advisory Board opposes this proposed amendment to Newcastle's Energy Code. We wrote a 5-page letter that we sent to the town board. We are considering posting that on Facebook so that residents can see what we wrote. And I'm not going to read that whole letter here, but I do want, is this on? I do want to mention a few key points.
Just go like this.
Hmm?
Go like
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when the town board talked about this, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, you didn't have specific data and we didn't have any specific data and you were having a discussion without data. And we were troubled by that and have asked for that data. So it looks like we got some of it, although nothing specific at this point in time. I still think if it's under consideration, we should get from Tom very specific data. And we also didn't have any information that supported the $50,000 threshold. How did you come up with that number? Or how did Tom come up with that number? We also spoke to 5 building inspectors in other Westchester municipalities, and we spoke to several New York Stretch experts from around the state, and all of them said they have not seen significant New York Stretch implementation issues, and they had not heard of any other municipality putting in something like this. So for the Sustainability Advisory Board, we're kind of alarmed that you would even consider this. And the proposed change increases greenhouse gas emissions in a time when we're seeing in parts of the US and countries around the planet that are experiencing these extreme weather-related disasters. So it's alarming to us, and it's all due to the climate crisis. So we have concerns.
Yeah. You know, one of the beauties of a public hearing, obviously we're not making a decision tonight, is to hear from everybody and to get questions answered and to get those data points. So I appreciate you and the SAB coming forth with those comments, and we did receive the letter in advance of the meeting, so thanks.
Good evening. My name is Michael Picarello, MAP Architects. I am not a resident of Newcastle, just to put it out there, but I am a local architect that does a lot of our work in Newcastle and the surrounding communities, some of which have adopted the stretch code and some of which have not. And we look at it as sort of in 3 parts. The first part is our ability as the design professional to implement the stretch code in any given project. And that involves time, because we have to go through the stretch code, look at our project, and try to make the project and the code fit together. And then there's the part about pricing the stretch code. And then the implication there is that there could be cost increase. Whether it's an $80 window or it's more insulation, there's potential increased costs that are associated with trying to be more energy conscious. So, and then the third part of it is the administration or the installation and then the verification of the same material. And obviously there's cost in that as well. So when I heard about the having a $50,000 threshold, it makes a lot of sense for us, because if we have a client who has a project in a very tight budget, and right now everyone has a tight budget because the prices have gone up considerably since COVID started. So your $50,000 budget today probably was, you could have bought a whole lot more with that 2 years ago. So the problem is there's a disproportional amount of money spent on the stretch code than the overall value of the project. So when you're into a $500,000 project or a $1 million project, it's a much smaller proportion that you have to pay to achieve the stretch code. But when you're talking about a $35,000 kitchen renovation, then there's definitely a more of a hardship because a larger percentage of your money is going to satisfy that stretch code. Now on our end, we've had to increase our fees to tackle the stretch code in the town. So if I have a call from Newcastle, Bedford, I automatically add more to my fee because I know I'm going to have to deal with the stretch code to try to make it fit within my client's budget. So again, that's more expense that you haven't spoken about. But so there's more than just it's more than just an $80 increase in a window, or it's even more than just a 12-week lead time on a window. It's more than that. And again, proportionally, having a threshold makes a lot of sense for my clients who are your neighbors because they want to do more with their money and they want to do something. And if I have a client that says, I can't afford that, then they won't do it. And then that project will die. And that project may never get to Tom. So I know some of the data points may not be fully registered because they have to get through me and through a contractor and pricing before we even get to Tom. So I speak on the behalf of all the applications that never even got to the building department. So that's really.
Just given your line of business, are there other things you're seeing in a project, for instance, that's less than $50,000, other than like a window?
Well, insulation values. So a lot of the to achieve a lot of the code requirements, you have to move. Not always, but sometimes you have to move into what's called spray foam. Spray foam is where you get a higher R value per inch, and certain certain structures. The only way you'll ever achieve the code is to use spray foam. Spray foam is 3 times the cost of fiberglass. Now, slowly, to be honest, slowly but surely, spray foam will become the new norm eventually. But at the moment, there's a cost involved, and when you have a tight budget, like $50,000, a $3,000 increase for a spray foam is a significant percentage compared to a $300,000 project, where it's a much smaller percentage, and that's really that's why I'm talking about this issue, because that's how it affects. So insulation values, Tom, I'm not clear on what NYSERDA came back to you with, but so we've dealt with it in other municipalities where if I have a brand new air handler in an attic, I have to fur out the rafters, I have to get R49 in the ceiling of that attic. So there's a big cost to doing that. So. But that's, so insulation values obviously, and then when it comes to HVAC, if you have a new system where you never had an air conditioner before, then you have to, there's things called the manual J, there's other things that the HVAC company has to do, and somebody has to pay for that. So again, there's the other layers to this than simply just a window. So yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, thanks a lot, thank you. Okay, hi, Kent Thomas, co-chair of the Sustainability Advisory Board. I'd first like to speak to what he said. He's off base as far as the insulation, because I've talked to NYSERDA's Chris Scroy and Mike DeWine, and there's 3 types of construction. There's alterations, there's an addition, and there's new construction. In alterations, insulation is not affected. And if you're putting in HVAC system and you're running it through an unconditioned space in an existing structure, there is no requirement to upgrade insulation. So having to spray foam in is just not true, okay? I'll even go a little further. If you have an existing structure and you want to put on an addition and you want to run ductwork through the existing structure to get to the addition, where the ductwork or air handlers are in the existing structure, the insulation does not have to be upgraded. It does have to conform to the stretch code in the new addition because it's a new area, but not in existing ones. And if we go a little bit further, an example, if you
Can I just ask you a question about that?
Sure.
Is that true? Because even now, I know if you have, let's say, a staircase that is completely not code compliant, but it was when your home was built, for instance, if you do anything to touch that staircase, you have to make that now code compliant. So I would think, taking that to its next conclusion, that if you did move, let's say, ductwork, and look, this isn't what I do for a living, but
I don't
if you did move ductwork that is not stretch code compliant but was compliant when it was put in, if you now start to tinker with that you then need to bring that up to code. That's my understanding of how
So
this
you're
all
moving
works.
ductwork from a conditioned space to an unconditioned space? I'm not.
I'm just saying, to say if you're changing it, but you don't, if you just said if you're running new ductwork through an old house, you no longer have to make it code compliant. I don't know if that's
In
true.
the existing structure
But
portion.
you're touching something that is now it's not code compliant. They don't make you change something that's already there, but if you're touching it and changing it, I don't know if that's true. My understanding of it was that you always had to then make it compliant with current code.
No, according to NYSERDA, you do not.
Which is why people don't touch things, because they don't wanna have to then
I
bring it up
understand the
to the next
staircase, because it
level.
has to be, the risers and the treads have to be certain dimensions, proportions. So I understand that. That does not apply here. Okay, it does not apply to any unconditioned space in an existing structure. You can put air ducts and air handlers, or ductwork and air handlers in there without requirement for any additional insulation. Okay.
Can I ask a question to Ed and Tom? As certainly Tom is the person who is the code enforcer in our town, and then Ed as counsel who would certainly take requests from Tom, I'm assuming, to interpret and understand that. What's the legal effect of NYSERDA saying one thing or the other?
Tom, do you want me to?
Please, Ed. That's a legal question.
Tom as the building inspector and code enforcement officer is the person in town charged with interpreting these codes. And potentially an appeal from an interpretation can be taken to the zoning board of appeals. And certainly NYSERDA's opinion on how something should be interpreted should be given deference. But Tom is it's where the rubber meets the road. He is the person charged with making the actual decision.
Right, I guess my point being that we're having in some ways an academic debate about what a particular project is going to be, how it's going to be characterized. And NYSERDA saying, don't worry about it, doesn't fall under the stretch code. So then Tom, you heard it here, don't worry about it. Then we don't have to worry about the worst case scenarios because they're not covered by the stretch code and those projects don't need to comply. Otherwise, what good is NYSERDA saying one thing or the other, I guess is my point.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, I think it's still Tom's call as the person charged with making the interpretation.
Right, but I guess if Tom raised this sort of concern and this point, and I think it's well worth having this discussion, we're now hearing certainly from folks that, certainly in NYSERDA have an interest in enforcement of the stretch code if it's gonna be adopted, hopefully statewide, that the things that we're most concerned about, or at least the things that have come up, don't even touch the stretch code. So then, Tom, I think you've got your answer that you don't need to enforce the stretch code in those circumstances. Seems to me. In which case it becomes a little bit of an academic debate to me.
Chris, if I may, it seems also counterintuitive what the stretch code is trying to achieve. In one aspect, they're saying that ducts should be in conditioned spaces, and now they're saying, no, they don't have to be pre-existing. You could be getting so much more in the benefits of energy savings in saying, yes, the pre-existing attics now have to be conditioned. But NYSERDA has made a ruling, and I will follow the ruling because they are the generators of the stretch code.
I mean, it sounds like to me, from what you're saying NYSERDA said, and Tom, what you said, that it's not going to apply to anything that's pre-existing. It's only going to apply to new construction or a new addition.
Understood, and I'm charged with interpreting the code, and if you do a new addition, in my opinion, that incorporates all the mechanicals that service the new addition, not just the parts that pass an imaginary line.
We have an email that that actually I sent for clarification. Mike DeWine made comments on it. I forwarded it to Tom and Sabrina. And it in fact says exactly what I'm saying to you right now, so.
That it doesn't really apply to anything that's
Correct.
pre-existing, it's only new construction.
Right.
Can you forward that to the board too?
Sure.
That would be great.
Sure. Okay, so I'm up here to be the window guy.
Well,
Okay.
because if that's true and it doesn't apply to anything that's, then we don't even need to have this conversation. No one's building an addition for less than $50,000. And if it applies to new, this wasn't this proposed discussion here was not meant to get at new additions or new construction. It was only meant to get at kind of rejiggering something within your home. But if they're saying the stretch code doesn't apply to any of that, then
Well, on,
to Chris's point, this is just
There-
academic.
This was just ducts.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the provision, the sentence says, the duct system in new buildings and additions shall be located in a conditioned space in accordance with, and then some sections. That's what we're talking about, not a categorical, anytime you have an alteration, stretch code never applies. That's not, I think, what
No, agreed,
Nice
but
over
read that again, please, cause it says new buildings and
additions.
which is not an alteration.
My point simply is that
It's
this
about
is,
ducts.
this section's talking about ducts,
Correct.
nothing more than that.
Right. Well, they included air handles or
Okay.
whatever, so I'm just passing.
I didn't want it to see, it seemed like it was creeping into everything, it's
No.
really limited to ducts.
Okay, so windows. So we did a little research. We went to Windorama, we went to Home Depot, we went to Lowe's, and we looked into getting windows. Okay. In each case, we had in our letter, I think we put in the letter, the manufacturers. There are 4 manufacturers. The lead times were exactly the same for a window that complied with the ECC NYS 2020 code, which is the base code, as well as the New York stretch code. The lead times were no different. Okay. And in the window business, basically the business model is made to order. Okay, so they don't really stock much of anything. What you're gonna find stocked in like big box stores or that kind of stuff is basically vinyl windows, okay, that may, they probably wouldn't conform to stretch code, but they would conform to the regular code. But in Newcastle, I don't think you're gonna find very many people who are putting vinyl windows into their houses.
You might, it depends
you
on the
might
price
find-
point.
But they're basically doing something a little different, and those are gonna have to be manufactured. And when they're manufactured, it's the same amount of time. Okay, so just to tell you, like I've looked into Anderson because I need some new sliding doors, and what they do is in order to get it to reach, so it's U factor 0.3 is the standard code, and U factor 0.27 is the stretch code. They just put another film on the inside panel of the dull pane glass. They put another film on the inside, okay, that reflects some heat back. And actually that gets it down, in my instance, to 0.25 instead of 0.27. $100 extra on basically $2,500 door. Lead time same as if it were either way, okay? So we're not saying, so the project's gonna take the same amount of time. There's gonna be a difference in cost, I agree with that, there's no way around that. But that's gonna be recouped over time also, okay? And, do you have a question, Tara?
No.
Okay, so to go on to that, Jennifer mentioned that we contacted 5, and it's in the letter, the towns that we contacted. And each of those towns said that they saw no difference in lead time between the 2 types of windows. They did, I didn't speak to all of them about cost, because a lot of the building inspectors said that they don't really get involved too much in the cost, but the architects and whatever, that's their job, so. But the ones that did talk about cost did say there was an increased cost. Okay, so as far as windows, I think that's where it stands, and I don't think it's a huge burden to homeowners. They're gonna have to plan ahead, whether it's a base code window compliant or a stretch code. So, it's basically the same. Okay, I'm just gonna go a couple other points so the other thing we have to look at with any of this is that whether you look at the code, whether we have implemented it now or we implement it in 2023, 2024, they're talking about upgrading the base code, okay? And some of this, the windows, we don't know exactly what's gonna be in there. It's likely the windows are gonna be in there, but maybe they won't be. But we're not just losing those 2 years, okay? The life of a window is like 40 years, roughly. So if we don't do it now, we're losing those energy savings for 40 years until they replace those windows. It's not just the 2 years, so you have to look at it a little differently. I can't speak really to the legalization of property, but in the light of a new code being adopted, if it is in 2023 and 2024, and they do have the improved windows, we still have the same issue. Right, and it's only a year or two out, or a year and a half out. The other thing, the analysis, this is getting off a little bit, but your analysis or the analysis of changing the stretch code to the $50,000 I didn't hear anything about commercial. Okay, we were talking about residential, but nobody really looked into what, I don't know, I'm not a big commercial guy, I don't know a lot about it, but I know there are increased standards for kitchen equipment, which also could be bypassed, and I don't know what the effects of that is. Okay, but we haven't looked at that. You know, so I'm gonna go along with Jen and I'm gonna say, this is a kind of an ironic time to be talking about lessening the energy standards, being that we've just had this heat wave. We have fires out in Texas and in California and Portugal and Spain. We have 104 temperatures in England. You know, it's just, we need to do what we can to reduce our carbon footprint. And I think that this is not quite the way to go about increasing our carbon footprint. I would, you know, so that's why we oppose it. All right? Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ken.
Gonna be. I didn't come here to speak, but I'm gonna make three quick points.
State your name for the record.
Vivek Agastya, resident, member of the SAB, but I'm here to just answer, make 3 points based on what our architect friend made earlier. I don't envy architects having to make plans to do different sets of codes, so I completely understand that architects in general would be unhappy having 2 sets of codes. They might be probably equally happy to have everyone adopt New York Stretch as they are to have everyone not. And I also don't envy Tom having to police this at all. 3 things that he said earlier that I want to point out are incorrect. Manual J's are required by all code, not just the Stretch. If you're redoing an HVAC system, you should be doing a manual J. You should have been doing it for the last 20 years. So it's not a new requirement. Manual J's need to be done.
What is a manual J?
It's a calculation and analysis that says so many HVAC technicians will come out there, look at your house, look at the size, and say you need a 3-ton system or you need a 5-ton system. That's not the right way to do it. You're supposed to actually do a calculation of the square footage of the outside walls that you have. What's the R value of your walls? What's the R value insulation of your roof? And how much hot heat you're losing before you decide, or how much heat's coming in before you decide what size of your AC system is. That's been the standard for decades, and it's a requirement under both the Stretch and the standard code. So that was one thing I wanted to correct. For the record, second, he mentioned spray foam insulation. You do not need a spray foam insulation to meet the Stretch code requirements. I'm in the middle of designing for an expansion, as Tom knows. We're not spray foaming insulation. We're going to meet the insulation requirements with standard bat insulation. And the third point he'd mentioned, which I wanted to correct, I've forgotten now. So I'll stop. There were 3 errors in his
Verification of same material. Was that the one? That's his third point was verification of material.
No, that wasn't what I wanted to talk about. But anyway, there's errors there. The New York Stretch does have a higher requirement, but to the discussion that's been here, I think the availability of windows is probably the only point that's justifiable and valid at this point, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody online have any comments?
Yes, we have 2 hands.
Okay.
Lisa,
Hi, Bill.
Bill Spade.
Hi, Bill.
Hey, Bill.
I don't see a video option, so I guess that's probably better off for you than you just hear my voice. But thanks for your time. First, I want to say Tom does a terrific job for our town as building inspector, and he's very diligent about what the requirements are. He's very willing to train us and help us to learn how, what we need to do. By the way, I'm an architect, as I think many of you know. So I enjoy working with Tom, and he does a terrific job. We as architects are learning how to design buildings in a new environment. And what we're talking about today in terms of the energy code, in 5 years or 10 years, it'll be the equivalent of talking about the difference between a Dell and a Gateway computer. Our need to build much better buildings is only beginning, and it's on us as architects to learn how to do this so we can educate our clients, so we can educate the community at large where we need to go in order to produce energy efficient buildings that don't rely on fossil fuels and therefore aren't contributing to carbon in the environment. That being said, therefore, I think the town taking an official stance to kind of backtrack on the stretch code would be a confusing message to send out. We as architects, we every day have to learn how to adopt and adapt to a new requirement in one way or another. So I believe it's something we're capable of doing, and with building inspectors like Tom who help us understand it, we're going to get there for today's requirements. And in 3 years, as I think you all know, the stretch energy code will become the base energy code. So any relief you grant today would be temporary in terms of today's requirements. Would you then continue to grant relief of the same kind in the future to the upgraded future requirements? It's just, it seems to be kind of a folly to keep upgrading the relief granted. So to grant the relief today to an R27 window where R32 might be required, is only going to be temporary, because in the near future the R27 will be the requirement. The manufacturers will be making windows, and let's even say it's the American manufacturers who still make code basic windows. We even know we're working on a project in town that you're all invited to come see, where we're using windows that are R11 and not R27 or R32. And that is where we need to be in terms of building. So, and I certainly encourage everyone who's considering any alterations to look carefully at these kinds of options, because they really do reduce your energy costs. Michael was referring to the cost that architects and others might incur, clients, for putting in upgraded windows, but the cost to the environment of not doing these things today is not yet factored into what we do. And we really need to be very considerate of what are the effects on our environment by choosing every day to use the least efficient product that's available, and it's a direct effect on the environment and on our long-term cost. One more thing, a gentleman, I apologize for his name, talked about the 40-year life of Windows. That's probably the biggest, what's the right word, aggravation comes to mind. That might not, that's a little too strong. But today in projects that we're doing, where we're changing all the windows in a house, and we know that that's a 30-year or 40-year decision, and that's what we decide today is, takes that house way past any of the timelines that we talk about in terms of having to achieve these much higher efficiency levels, and yet we struggle to get clients to decide between an R32 and an R30 window when we need to be at R11 today in terms of how we're building in order to meet any of the climate goals that have been proposed. So that all to say, as much as I again respect the work Tom does, I think that the relief would be not appropriate, and look forward to the board helping to further the energy standards that we try to use here in town. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
All right, next person. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, I'm also a member of the SAB, but I'm really speaking in terms of someone who does need to change nearly every window and door in my home. We're talking at least
Sorry.
30. Can you hear me? I know, look, it's long overdue. And considering this, especially with the heat wave, I've had to repair my air conditioning unit, which is only 5 years old, a couple times, and I feel like the energy efficiency of a home is compromised when you don't have the better windows, right? Or the garage doors that have the back door, and that your systems have to work harder. So it's already been mentioned that we have sort of a long-term, short-term gain, short-term gain that is going to lose long-term benefits. And for me, when I consider what we're going to do, I certainly am not wanting to speak towards others' budgets, but I do know that it is in my best interest to have a home that is more energy efficient, especially from a resale value and also from a monthly expense with rising energy costs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who has their digital hand raised? Okay. All right, we're all good here? Okay, thank you. So I think the board needs time to confer about this, but so let's close the public or adjourn the public hearing for tonight. And we can decide as a board if we want to keep it open or just discontinue the public hearing going forward. Sound good?
Would you wanna schedule a work session or continue the public hearing and give other folks an opportunity who might not have had a chance tonight?
If we decide not to move forward as a board, what's the next step? To just withdraw it, close it, be done?
If that was the consensus, you could just stop here and now. But if there's a desire to keep talking about it, to get more comment or information, then we would wanna put it on another public meeting, either as a.
I'm ready to close it out myself.
I am too.
Move forward.
I'm ready to close it out.
Okay. Vicky?
Yes, I am ready to close it out, and based on what I've heard tonight, if the reasoning is that energy efficient measures are going to increase costs and increase lead time, I think that we have to acknowledge that we can't keep living the way we have been, and that there is a cost to using carbon fuels and these emissions. So I just have not heard anything at all to compel me to amend the stretch code, and if there's a consensus on that, then I don't see why we would continue having public hearings.
I wanted to give the board the opportunity to talk about it, but I happen to agree as well that I feel fully comfortable abandoning this and just closing the public hearing at this point. And look, if at some point we find it needs to be reopened, we always can, but I am, all in favor of making sure we do our part for the environment, as small as it may be. And I agree, I'm in favor of closing it at this point. Okay, so is there a different kind of closing that we
You may
do?
wanna just entertain a motion to close the public hearing and just put it to bed in that way.
Okay, so can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I moved.
I move to close the public hearing.
That's three, that's good.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
Sorry, who seconded?
okay.
Chris.
I think Chris seconded it.
I moved.
I think
thought.
Chris moved, yeah, I don't think Vicky can hear him that well. Alright, so I think we're just moving on to minutes at this point. Before we get to the consent agenda, was there anything that anyone wanted to remove from the consent agenda items? Okay, so let's move to our minutes.
Minutes?
Minutes?
I'm sorry, our
I
resolutions.
was wondering you were talking.
Our resolutions, sorry, it's been a long day.
Okay,
You want me to start?
shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Do I have to read all these out?
No.
I just referenced
I move to adopt the consent agenda as submitted, consisting of the items listed herein.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Payment of claims, I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $955,170.01 listed on the summary pre-check writing report and detailed voucher detail report, both dated July 25, 2022. Checks will be cut and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, July 27, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Tara?
I move to adopt the following resolution, whereas on April 19th, 2022, the town board introduced a proposed local law to amend chapter 60 of the town code zoning with respect to the display of signs in residential districts. And whereas the resolution adopted on May 3rd, 2022, the town board scheduled a public hearing and referred the proposed local law to the Town of Newcastle Planning Board pursuant to Town Code 6600 and the Westchester County Planning Board pursuant to New York General Municipal Law and the Westchester County Administrative Code. And whereas on May 24th, 2022, the town board opened a public hearing on the proposed local law, which was continued to June 14th, 2022 and July 12th, 2022, at which time those wishing to comment on the proposed local law had an opportunity to be heard. And whereas the proposed local law constitutes a type 2 action pursuant to the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, and accordingly no further environmental review is required. Now therefore be it resolved that the town board hereby adopts the local law and directs the town clerk to transmit a copy of the same to Westchester County Planning Board.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
I move to authorize the award of a bid for building cleaning contract to Paramount Services Group for the total amount of $4,535.81 for general cleaning services at 210-280 Joan Corwin Way and 200 South Greeley Avenue, due on a monthly basis, plus any additional services separate from the base bid that may be required as outlined in the contract for the period of 1 year, with the option of 3 possible 1-year extensions effective September 1st, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Jeremy, you wanna close us out?
Sure, I did the last one. I move to authorize the award of the bid of 2022 camp bus contract to Chappaqua Transportation as per the cost per bus bid sheet outlined in the contract effective June 27th of this year through August 5th of this year.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to
Is
adjourn.
there anything else we don't have here? Alright,
I move to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you, good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
you.
Tom.
Bye, Vicky, thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Thanks, Terry.
Good night, thank you.
Shows up, it's a good day in my book.